Carbon monoxide safety. Diligent awareness. How much CO is too much? Well, at the beginning, carbon monoxide is a toxic gas. It acts like a poison. It's referenced in abbreviation as CO. CO is unhealthy to breathe. CO can injure or kill and is a byproduct of incomplete combustion. I'm Bob Dwyer, certified subject matter educator, carbon monoxide safety, director of training of the Carbon Monoxide Safety Association, or COSA, and visit the Carbon Monoxide News at www.cosafety.blogspot.com. Two circumstances make carbon monoxide, or CO, a hazard. It's produced in high enough concentrations to hurt someone. It has a way to reach people. The number one cause of accidental CO poisoning in North America is from automotive and other liquid fuel-burning combustion systems running in enclosed spaces, like attached garages. So never warm up cars inside a garage or use generators inside that garage, even if large doors are open. Keep those outside. If you're working on a car as a mechanic, even with the door open, I know it's hard to do, but it's not safe practice with the automobile running, even for brief periods of time. Carbon monoxide can leak through the building if a vehicle is running, as an example in the graphic with the garage underneath the living space. So buildings and structures, carbon monoxide, it's a present danger. And that danger exists in many buildings where CO may be found. I've used this slide thousands of times. And the example is I have just about all of these. In fact, I know I have all of these where I live. All these types of buildings and more types of buildings. And again, these just represent where CO has been found. Injuries, accidents, and deaths have occurred. So every type of building that we look at has a CO story. And these CO stories can include injury or death, or where an injury did not occur because there was the diligence of awareness and the presence of alarms. Every building has a story. Perhaps some of them have carbon monoxide stories. You may live in a building like one pictured, maybe one not pictured. You may service buildings that look like any of these. You may live in vehicles for pleasure, knowing that some of the recreational vehicles can have up to 4, 5, 6 different combustion systems, each one with the potentials of generating carbon monoxide gas. So we need to be aware of the buildings. We need to be aware of where we are. That's why I always carry a personal CO monitor, because I'm around combustion wherever I go. Different motels I've stayed in, hundreds, perhaps 1,000 plus or more motels in my career of traveling around conducting classes on carbon monoxide awareness. In this particular case, there's some motel poisonings remembered. Daryl and Shirley Jenkins both lost their lives to carbon monoxide poisoning in a hotel room in Boone, North Carolina on April 16, 2013. Jeffrey Lee Williams died several weeks after Daryl and Shirley Jenkins did, while staying in the same motel room. In the same motel. Please recognize and support the efforts of the Jenkins Foundation and the Jeffrey Lee Williams Foundation. Well, in these buildings, we have controlled combustion systems. Some of the ones that we live in have perhaps one or more of the types of systems pictured here. Certainly you may have a newer gas range and oven, but combustion's combustion. 4 burners and an oven of any size. Um, we need to just be aware that in our own homes and apartments we may have combustion systems that need servicing, and they need to be serviced and they need to be tested to be performing to the manufacturer's specifications. And the with proper test instrumentation, the appliances, the gas appliances, can be checked to see if they're producing carbon monoxide in hazardous concentrations. Well, it's not just the heating systems. There's many other combustion systems out there. A lot of them are recreational, snowmobiles and boats, recreational vehicles, motorcycles. Um, we may uh, have a gas generator for our recreational vehicles. We may have one for backup and emergencies. These have been known to, as I've already indicated, very, very hazardous when it comes to carbon monoxide and the numbers of incidences of poisonings, whether it be boats. So again, we have a lot of combustion systems, and often there are carbon monoxide exposures. When is it best for me to be CO alarmed or you to be CO alarmed? Well, let's look at our current health. Let's look at the current health of everybody. Some of us are healthier than others. Some of us require care, from infants to elder to illness, disability. So carbon monoxide is not good for any of us. So the lower level that's detected, and the sooner we react to eliminating carbon monoxide in our environment, that's a health plus. And a lot of times, physicians that have not tested patients, when they present symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, uh, very seldom does that physician or healthcare provider measure for carbon monoxide. So low-level detection is going to help everybody out. Uh, and we'll take a look at alarms. We'll take a look at what levels carbon monoxide begins to impact us. So one of the steps is looking at CO alarms, and they're commonly and readily available for us to examine. We'll take a look at carbon monoxide alarms. If you're living in a rental, law, code, safety, common sense, you may have carbon monoxide alarms in place. If you're a homeowner, if you just bought a new home, some codes, some laws, building codes require carbon monoxide alarms. In those homes, we know they require smoke detectors. You can purchase combination carbon monoxide alarms and smoke detectors. Um, you can buy some that have a digital display that will give you a measurement of um, carbon monoxide that may be in the airspace that the alarm is in. If you don't have a digital display, um, they, all these systems still need to fulfill the requirements of testing performance under the Underwriters Laboratory Standard 2034, whether they're digital or whether they're non-digital. So they all have the alarm sounding set points, and we'll discuss these in more detail, but here's a quick introduction to it. The alarm set points are 70 parts per million, 150 parts per million, and 400 parts per million. So we'll take a look at those. Now, some people of vulnerable health are going to require a reading under 70 parts per million. They're going to need a requirement of one under 30 parts per million or under 20 parts per million. Some people should not be breathing any levels of carbon monoxide if it's at all avoidable. So the only way you're going to be able to do that is with a low-level monitor, and that'll be the most effective way. But we'll take a look at that while we're asking ourselves, who's responsible for the air that you breathe? When we breathe in carbon monoxide, we generate something called carboxyhemoglobin, or referenced as COHB%. CO for carbon monoxide and HB for hemoglobin. Well, inside the body, it's quantified by the scale, this percent scale. It's a blood test. Well, there's other ways it can be done now. There's breath analysis for carbon monoxide. There's pulse CO oximetry. It's different than a pulse ox. And so you can define then whether or not carbon monoxide is causing the symptoms or the problems associated with some other compounding health symptoms. A doctor is something they just can't listen to. Excuse me. It has to be tested for. So again, keep in mind, when we inhale CO, it bonds with hemoglobin in blood, displaces oxygen, and it forms carboxyhemoglobin. You wonder why that little pet is in place? For years and years, I've run into circumstances where pets have gotten sick and were the precursor to people finding out that they had carbon monoxide in their homes that was causing the dog's illness first, and then finally they themselves found themselves sick from carbon monoxide. So that's why that little dog is there. CO effects on people and animals: dizziness, headache, confusion, head stuffiness, elevated blood carboxyhemoglobin levels, fatigue, eye and upper respiratory irritation, persistent cough, wheezing or bronchial constriction, increased frequency of angina in persons with coronary heart disease. There's endothelium damage. That's the inner lining of your blood vessels. The University of Pennsylvania in the mid-1990s did a study. They found that the inner lining of the blood vessels, or the endothelium, was being damaged by levels as low as 9 parts per million. Chronic environments. Cigarette smokers had a greater damage to that endothelium. And, later on, one of the discoveries that I became aware of was that when medications were needed to be inserted intravenously, that became a problem because these blood vessels had thinned so much from chronic exposure to carbon monoxide. If there's a carbon monoxide poisoning incident in your home or your neighborhood or building or anywhere, the initial emergency responders may issue standard therapy, which is supplying supplemental oxygen and ventilatory support and monitoring the heart rate while they're transporting you. Higher exposures would require a hyperbaric chamber to force carbon monoxide out of the blood and replacing it with oxygen. We'll look at this color graph of concentrations of carbon monoxide here in just a little bit. But always in summary, carbon monoxide is a toxic gas. It requires measurement. It's identified by the chemical symbol CO. It's one carbon atom bound to one oxygen atom, and equals 1 molecule of carbon monoxide, or CO. It's tasteless, odorless, invisible. It's poisonous effects. It's typically measured in parts per million, or ppm. That's the number of molecules present in a million molecules of air. So CO is often called a poison due to its effect on health as it displaces oxygen on blood hemoglobin and on binding sites and forms carboxyhemoglobin, or COHB. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Let's take a look at some parts per million. Let's take a look at some reasons why measurement is vital as we encounter these parts per million. A lot of poisonings and deaths associated with carbon monoxide could have been and will be prevented if, one, you measure carbon monoxide when you enter any building. Whether you do that as a consumer, whether you do that as a service provider, emergency responder, in your place of business, for your own protection when you're at work. If there is a poisoning, and people have been verified using pulse oximetry or breath analysis or blood analysis that a poisoning has occurred, a thorough test of all the combustion systems and the building's interactive components should be performed after that CO discovery or evacuation. And that includes using combustion analyzers and other testing devices to check combustion systems, as to make sure that if there were smoke detectors or carbon monoxide alarms present, that they did actually work, and they have batteries in them or they were wired to work. If we need to call in a building scientist to measure building pressures to determine why some of the appliances don't vent properly all the time, what building components, is there leakage in this building, or duct leakage that's causing some problems. Recommendation of low-level carbon monoxide detection that allows the inhabitant of the building to see carbon monoxide that is in their building space. It's not alarming. It goes up to a certain point or down to a certain point. It's something that they can learn from. So carbon monoxide alarms at the lowest levels provide education, and they provide added safety. Well, let's look at our color chart. Start here at the highest concentration. These are the carbon monoxide levels of concern. That's the title of this handout. Again, this is not to be any kind of medical diagnosis. It's just some safeguards associated with carbon monoxide parts per million measurements, and it also deals with the concentrations known for carbon monoxide alarms and when they sound off. So let's start with 12,000 parts per million. Death within 1 to 3 minutes. You can get that from a fire, a smoldering fire. You can get carbon monoxide generated real early in a bad situation. So it's good to have detection that will give you a fast alarms response. 1,600 parts per million of carbon monoxide. Nausea within 20 minutes. Death within 1 hour. 800 parts per million. Nausea and convulsions. Death within 2 hours. 400 parts per million. Frontal headaches within 1 to 2 hours. Life-threatening within 3 hours. Well, your UL 2034 listed carbon monoxide alarms, they cannot sound for the first 4 minutes when it's over 400 parts per million, but they must alarm before 15 minutes are up. Now, that's the way the standard is written, and that is in the instruction book or pamphlet associated with your UL 2034 alarm. You do have to look for it in that instruction. 200 parts per million of carbon monoxide. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health Administration, a worker will not be exposed to more than this amount. From my experiences, if you're measuring carbon monoxide and you're around propane forklifts, going in and out of tractor trailers and in some other situations, it's really, really hard not to be exceeding this exposure limit of ever being exposed to that much carbon monoxide. Well, we'll continue down the color bar there, 150 parts per million. Again, your UL 2034 CO alarm comes into play, the UL 2034 listed alarm. It cannot sound for the first 10 minutes. When it goes over 150 parts per million and it's under 400 parts per million, it has to resist alarming for 10 minutes, but it must respond before 50 minutes. So if it's over 150 and under 400, we'll say it's at 375 parts per million of carbon monoxide. So it has to wait for at least 10 minutes, but it can take up to 50 minutes for it to alert you that you're in 350 parts per million of carbon monoxide. The next level, 70 parts per million, your UL 2034 listed CO alarm. It cannot sound off for the first hour over 70 parts per million and under 150 parts per million, but it must sound before 4 hours are up. So again, you could be in 80 parts per million of carbon monoxide, and you may not know that you're in it for 3 hours or 3.5 hours because the listing states that it can take this alarm up to 4 hours to let you know that, and that's still approved by the listing process. The next concentration we'll look at is 50 parts per million. That's a maximum average level for continuous exposure, and it's represented in what's called a time-weighted average, or a TWA, in an 8-hour workday, and that's per federal U.S. law, or OSHA. So in a workplace, if you work an 8-hour shift as an example, in your first hour, carbon monoxide levels were around 10 parts per million. The second hour, they were 40 parts per million. The third hour, they were 10. And the fourth hour, they were 20. Fifth hour, they were 90. If you went through the full 8-hour shift and if you averaged under 50 parts per million, it was not illegal in reference to the federal law. Oh, continuing on, 36 to 99 parts per million. These are excessive levels with foreseeable health hazards. It's always suggested that there be a medical alert, a health consultation, especially if levels displayed are chronic conditions. We always advise the use of air packs, EMTs, emergency responders. Ventilation is required, and source discovery testing is recommended. At 35 parts per million, this is a 8-hour exposure time-weighted average limit by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health Administration of the Centers for Disease Control. This is also when many fire departments begin civilian evacuation, and it's a limit upon incident measurement. When they put on their breathing apparatus, 10 to 50 parts per million of CO. These are levels where fire department personnel begin to wear breathing apparatus, and this may vary from community to community. 10 to 35 parts per million, fire departments may begin the evacuation of buildings at these levels. It's marginal for small children, elderly, those suffering respiratory or heart problems. They're cautioned if these are chronic exposure concentrations. And even if they're not, if there's a 911 medical call and the EMTs are responding and they have personal CO monitors on their ready packs, and they alarm and alert the EMTs that this is a carbon monoxide exposure, they will, if it's above their set point, if their set points on their alarms are 25 parts per million or 35 parts per million or 10 parts per million, they will put on their breathing apparatus and evacuate you, that building. So again, keep in mind that the protocols for evacuation, the protocols for self-contained breathing apparatus are much lower than the UL 2034 alarm low end concentration alarm set point. And then we get to the lower concentration of 25 parts per million. That's an 8-hour time-weighted limit by the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. They're saying that people shouldn't be in this environment at all if it's above 25 parts per million. 9 part per million short-term average. This may be a concentration often measured around busy city streets and intersections, or parking lots, or anywhere where combustion systems are gathered. I was in a flea market walking through the food court area, and my personal carbon monoxide alarm sounded off. I had it set for 35 parts per million. And as I was standing 15 feet away from the closest one, as I was walking through a small little temporary avenue of food truck systems that were all running generators, that my personal monitor, while I was outdoors, was alerting me to the levels of carbon monoxide. So we need to take a look at where we are, be diligent about what kind of combustion systems may be around us. You know, even as a consumer, you can get personal CO monitors for yourself. You can get low-level monitors for your homes. Keep using the UL 2034 alarms, but have at least one low-level monitor. I think you'll benefit from them, and you'll learn from the use of low-level measurement. Well, that's carbon monoxide safety. Diligent awareness, how much CO is too much. Remember, carbon monoxide is a toxic gas and it acts like a poison. I'm Bob Dwyer with the Carbon Monoxide Safety Association. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your carbon monoxide safety.